What started as a routine late-night interview turned into television chaos when Jennifer Aniston confronted Jimmy Kimmel about his controversial comedy sketches, leading to an explosive on-air meltdown that ended with the beloved actress storming off set in disgust. The studio audience at Jimmy Kimmel Live buzzed with anticipation as Jennifer Aniston walked onto the familiar stage, waving graciously to the crowd. Her appearance had been heavily promoted all week, with promos highlighting her upcoming projects and reminiscing about her iconic Friends days. What nobody expected was that this seemingly routine promotional appearance would spiral into one of the most uncomfortable confrontations in late-night television history. Kimmel greeted Aniston with his usual theatrical enthusiasm, but keen observers might have noticed something different in his demeanor. His smile seemed forced, his energy slightly manic. Earlier that day, social media had been buzzing about a particularly crude sketch from the previous week's show that many felt crossed the line, mocking serious issues that resonated deeply with audiences. The backlash had been swift and brutal, with celebrities and fans alike calling out the comedian for his insensitive approach to comedy. As they settled into their chairs, Kimmel launched into his typical banter, making jokes about Aniston's recent projects and her enduring popularity. The actress responded politely but professionally, her answers shorter than usual. Something felt off about the entire exchange, an underlying tension that the studio audience couldn't quite place but definitely sensed. The conversation meandered through safe topics for the first few minutes. Aniston discussed her latest streaming series, shared a few harmless anecdotes about working with her co-stars, and even laughed at Kimmel's attempts at humor. But beneath her practiced Hollywood smile, there was a steeliness in her eyes that suggested she had something more substantial on her mind than promoting her latest project. Kimmel, perhaps sensing the shift in energy, decided to pivot the conversation in a direction that would prove to be catastrophically misjudged. With his trademark smirk, he brought up a recent charity event that Aniston had attended, one focused on supporting women who had experienced workplace harassment. Instead of treating the topic with the gravity it deserved, Kimmel began making light of the situation, cracking jokes about Hollywood's dramatic response to serious issues. The studio audience grew noticeably quieter as Kimmel's comments became increasingly inappropriate. He seemed oblivious to the discomfort he was creating, doubling down on his humor even as Aniston's expression grew more stern. The actress shifted in her chair, her media training keeping her composed even as her patience began wearing thin. "You know, Jimmy," Aniston finally interjected, her voice carrying a warning edge that anyone familiar with her work would recognize. "Some things aren't really appropriate to joke about." Her words were measured and controlled, but there was an unmistakable firmness behind them that suggested she was giving him an opportunity to course correct. Instead of heeding the warning, Kimmel seemed to interpret her pushback as an invitation to double down. He launched into an even more insensitive routine, making crude references to the very real experiences of women in the entertainment industry. The camera caught audience members exchanging uncomfortable glances, some looking genuinely appalled at what they were witnessing unfold in real time. Aniston's composure finally began to crack. Years of navigating Hollywood's complex power dynamics, of watching friends and colleagues suffer in silence, of using her platform to advocate for meaningful change, all came rushing to the surface. The professional mask she had worn for decades of interviews started to slip, revealing the passionate advocate underneath. "I'm sorry, but I have to stop you right there," she said, her voice now carrying the full weight of her frustration. The studio fell completely silent, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Even Kimmel seemed to realize that he had pushed too far, but his ego wouldn't let him back down gracefully. The tension in the room was palpable, as America's sweetheart prepared to unleash years of pent-up frustration on one of late-night television's biggest stars, setting the stage for a confrontation that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. "Jimmy, what you're doing right now is exactly the problem," Aniston said, her voice cutting through the uncomfortable silence like a knife. The studio audience held its collective breath as one of Hollywood's most beloved actresses abandoned all pretense of polite interview decorum. "You think it's funny to mock women who have been brave enough to speak out about their experiences? You think their pain is material for your comedy?" Kimmel's face flushed red as he realized the interview had taken a turn he wasn't prepared for. His usual arsenal of deflection tactics and self-deprecating humor suddenly felt inadequate against Aniston's laser-focused intensity. "Look, Jen, I think you're taking this a little too seriously," he stammered, attempting to regain control of the situation with a nervous laugh that fell completely flat. The actress leaned forward in her chair, her eyes blazing with an intensity that surprised even longtime fans who thought they knew her gentle demeanor. "Too seriously? Jimmy, I've sat through your show multiple times over the years, watching you make jokes at the expense of people who can't defend themselves. I've watched you mock survivors, dismiss legitimate concerns, and treat serious social issues like they're punchlines for your monologue." The cameras continued rolling, capturing every moment of what was rapidly becoming the most explosive late-night television confrontation in years. Backstage, producers frantically debated whether to cut to commercial, but the raw authenticity of the moment kept them frozen in place. This wasn't scripted drama. This was real emotion erupting in front of millions of viewers. Kimmel's defensive instincts kicked in, and he made the fatal mistake of trying to turn the tables on his guest. "Come on, Jennifer. You've been in this business long enough to know how comedy works. We push boundaries, we make people uncomfortable sometimes. That's what good comedy does." His voice carried a condescending tone that only served to fuel Aniston's growing anger. "Good comedy?" Aniston's voice rose slightly, her composure slipping further with each passing second. "Good comedy doesn't punch down at vulnerable people. Good comedy doesn't trivialize trauma or make light of systematic abuse. What you call pushing boundaries, I call being cruel and irresponsible with your platform." The studio audience began murmuring among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, others seemingly riveted by the rare display of unfiltered honesty on what was usually a carefully choreographed show. Kimmel glanced nervously at his producers off-camera, looking for guidance on how to handle a situation that had spiraled far beyond his control. "I think you're overreacting here," Kimmel said, his voice taking on a sharper edge as his own frustration began to show. "I've been doing this show for years, and suddenly everyone's become so sensitive about everything. We can't joke about anything anymore without someone getting offended." That comment proved to be the final straw for Aniston. Her years of media training, her reputation for professionalism, her careful cultivation of a likable public persona, all of it evaporated in an instant as she witnessed Kimmel dismiss legitimate criticism as mere oversensitivity. "Sensitive?" she repeated, her voice now carrying a dangerous quiet that made the previous tension seem mild by comparison. "Jimmy, when you make jokes about women being harassed in the workplace, you're not being edgy or boundary pushing. You're being complicit in a culture that has silenced and marginalized people for decades." The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with both parties now fully committed to a battle that neither seemed willing or able to back down from, setting up an even more explosive continuation of their heated exchange. Kimmel's face contorted, with a mixture of embarrassment and anger, as he realized his usual charm offensive wasn't working. The audience he had cultivated for years, the loyal fan base that laughed at his every joke, sat in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most respected actresses systematically dismantled his entire comedic philosophy on live television. "You know what, Jennifer?" Kimmel said, his voice now dripping with barely contained hostility. "Maybe you should stick to acting instead of trying to lecture me about comedy. I've been making people laugh for decades while you've been pretending to be someone else for a living." The personal attack landed like a slap across the face, causing audible gasps from the studio audience. Aniston's eyes widened in disbelief at the sheer audacity of his response. "Pretending to be someone else?" she repeated, her voice trembling with a combination of shock and rage. "Jimmy, at least when I'm acting, I'm not hiding behind the guise of entertainment to spread harmful messages. At least I'm not using my platform to belittle people who have already been hurt." The cameras caught every micro-expression as the two celebrities engaged in what was rapidly becoming one of the most uncomfortable moments in television history. Kimmel shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead as he realized he had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But his pride wouldn't let him apologize or back down. "Look, if people can't handle a few jokes, maybe they shouldn't be watching late-night television," Kimmel shot back, his defensive posture becoming more aggressive by the second. "This is entertainment, not a therapy session. People tune in to forget their problems, not to have them dissected and analyzed to death." Aniston stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor with a sound that echoed through the suddenly silent studio. The action caught everyone off guard. Guests simply didn't stand up during interviews unless they were leaving. The power dynamic shifted instantly, with Aniston now literally looking down at Kimmel, who remained seated and suddenly appeared much smaller. "That's exactly the attitude that perpetuates the problem," she said, her voice steady but filled with righteous anger. "You think entertainment gives you a free pass to be cruel? You think because people are laughing, it absolves you of responsibility for the harm you cause?" She gestured toward the audience, many of whom were now openly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to regain control of the situation. "Sit down, Jennifer. You're making a scene over nothing. This is my show, and I won't be lectured by someone who doesn't understand how comedy works." His words came out harsher than he intended, revealing the ugly entitlement that had been lurking beneath his jovial television persona. The studio fell into complete silence. Even the cameramen seemed frozen in place, unsure whether they should continue filming or cut away from what was clearly becoming an unprecedented meltdown. Aniston stared at Kimmel for a long moment, her expression cycling through disbelief, disappointment, and finally, resolve. "Your show?" she repeated quietly, her voice carrying a dangerous calm that made everyone lean forward to hear her words. "Jimmy, this might be your show, but it's broadcast into millions of homes where real people are dealing with real problems. You have a responsibility to those people, whether you want to acknowledge it or not." Kimmel's response was swift and brutal. "I don't owe anyone anything except a good time. If you don't like it, there's the door." He pointed toward the exit, his gesture dismissive and condescending. The gesture would later be replayed countless times on social media, becoming an instant symbol of everything wrong with his approach to handling criticism. The audience gasped collectively at his rudeness. Several people in the front rows shook, their heads in disapproval, while others pulled out their phones to capture what was clearly going to be a viral moment. The atmosphere in the studio had shifted completely from entertainment to witnessing a career-defining disaster unfold in real time. Aniston looked at Kimmel with a mixture of pity and disgust that was more devastating than any angry outburst could have been. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, with the entire studio holding its breath as America's sweetheart processed the full extent of the host's disrespect. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of decades of experience in an industry that had tried to silence women like her. "You know what, Jimmy? You're absolutely right. There is the door, and I'm going to use it." Her words were measured and calm, but they carried more power than any screaming match ever could. "But before I go, I want everyone watching to understand what just happened here tonight." She turned slightly to address the cameras directly, bypassing Kimmel entirely as if he had become irrelevant to the conversation. "What you just witnessed is exactly why so many people in this industry have stayed silent for so long. When someone tries to hold you accountable for harmful behavior, you attack their character, dismiss their concerns, and try to make them feel like they're the problem. Kimmel sat frozen in his chair, realizing too late that he had just handed Aniston the perfect platform to deliver a devastating final statement. His attempts to interrupt were futile, as she continued with the poise and authority that had made her one of Hollywood's most respected figures. "I came here tonight to promote my work and have a friendly conversation," Aniston continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Instead, I was subjected to cruel jokes about serious issues, dismissed when I tried to express my concerns, personally attacked when I stood my ground, and finally told to leave when I wouldn't back down." The studio audience began to murmur their approval, some even applauding quietly as they witnessed Aniston turn Kimmel's own rudeness against him. The host looked increasingly desperate, his face red with embarrassment as he realized his career was potentially being destroyed in real time. "This is exactly the kind of behavior that has made this industry toxic for so many people," Aniston said, her final words directed not at Kimmel, but at the millions of viewers watching at home. "When someone uses their platform to mock vulnerable people and then attacks anyone who dares to call them out, they're not being edgy or funny. They're being bullies." With that devastating assessment hanging in the air, Aniston removed her microphone. With deliberate precision, the small action somehow carrying enormous symbolic weight. She placed it carefully on the coffee table between them, the gesture serving as a final rejection of everything Kimmel and his show represented. "Thank you for proving my point so thoroughly tonight, Jimmy," she said with icy politeness that was more cutting than any insult. "I hope your audience sees this for what it really is." The actress walked toward the exit with her head held high, her dignity intact despite the ugly confrontation she had just endured. As she reached the edge of the stage, spontaneous applause broke out from sections of the studio audience, growing louder as more people joined in. The sound of clapping hands echoed through the studio as viewers showed their support for someone who had finally said what many had been thinking for years. Kimmel sat alone at his desk, the applause clearly not meant for him, his face a mask of humiliation and barely controlled rage. The cameras captured every moment of his discomfort as he realized that his attempt to humiliate a respected actress had backfired spectacularly. His producers scrambled behind the scenes, knowing they had captured television history, but not the kind that would help their host's reputation. As Aniston disappeared through the exit doors, the studio fell into an awkward silence, broken only by scattered conversations among audience members who couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Kimmel attempted to regain control, mumbling something about going to commercial, but his words lacked conviction. The damage was done, the moment was over, and everyone in that studio knew they had just watched a career-defining disaster unfold. The confrontation that had started as a routine celebrity interview had ended with one of Hollywood's most beloved stars walking away with her dignity intact, leaving behind a host whose true character had been exposed for millions to see. The incident would dominate social media within hours, sparking conversations about accountability, respect, and the responsibility that comes with having a platform to reach millions of people every night.